Welcome to the No Fear podcast and the No Fear live broadcast. I'm your host, Tony Lawler. If you're into mindset training, performance psychology, personal development, you'll dig this new format. No Fear Live is a unique broadcast, and it's different from the No Fear podcast. We decided to go live because we wanted to create the opportunity to interact with people like you all over the world, where anyone can log in and ask questions, and in some cases, you may even get invited into the show. The great thing about the live broadcast is that it's much more personal for the listener. That's you. Remember, self-defense isn't always about a confrontation with someone else. The first and most important fight is winning the one inside your head. Dun, dun, dun. Dude,
that's a great intro. I like that intro.
It's cool. I enjoy watching it. It's a little lame of me to enjoy it. Sometimes I just sit here all afternoon just watching that intro.
Look at yourself.
all over myself, look at myself going, oh, I remember when I didn't have those wrinkles and I had more hair.
The biggest concern you're going to have is when you start looking at yourself and going, who is that?
Right. And I do that often. So, hey, before we start chit-chatting and forgetting that other people may be listening and interacting, asking questions, I want to introduce my good friend, Deane Lawler. Deane and I have known each other close to 32, 33 years. We met in 1991 during my first tour of Australia. And I'll tell a couple of funny stories. Before I do that, I'll add this wicked picture here. Check this out. Look at these two guys. Look at fucking Ned here. Holy shit.
Yeah. I'm more concerned about those pants I've got on.
You still have those, don't you?
Okay. No, thank God.
But you can't find them because they're camo.
That's right.
But look at these look at these lads here. Holy moly, dude. My boy.
Little young fellas in.
How old's your son now?
He's 33.
Wow. Nicky's 32.
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay. Well, that's proof that we've known each other that long. And it's like in the spirit of you, what you just said as a joke, when you start looking at yourself going, who is that guy? I do that quite often, where I look at a picture of myself these days and I go, what the fuck? I don't even recognize myself.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, I think it's crazy about getting old, I think. You know, when you age, I think I can understand why people become very spiritual as they get older, because you start to say to yourself, well, what was it all about? Mm-hmm. All that training, all that knowledge, and what, it just suddenly ends. You know, I think that's the biggest question we get. You know, that's what I find myself doing these days.
Well, and it's funny. It's funny because, you know, we chat more than we get a chance to talk. But anytime we get together, just for some background, guys, for those of you listening to this, and I know this is a weird time for us, but there's like 10 of you on the call here. Please, if you're not driving, text and tell us where you're listening from. And of course, you know, we'll be answering any questions you have as, you know, Deane and I catch up for like 30, 40 minutes, and then we'll do some Q&A. But I went over to Australia, and I would say, and I've said this before, what Deane was doing in Australia was like parallel convergence, where it was the same stuff that I was doing here, just without the weird accent. And none of our critters over here are as deadly as the ones in Australia. One of the scariest times of my life was walking around when we went up to Darwin and we went up to Earl Montague's place, and I'm like just you guys are walking around, and I'm like terrified of getting bit by anything. You guys probably didn't know I was shitting in my pants and shaking inside. But, crazy. But what I wanted to say was this, and I want to just do a little pre-brief and then let Deane go, because we don't talk that often. And what you said right from the get-go about getting spiritual as you get older, that was one of the questions I have, and just hold that because I'm going to come back to it, is you've experienced and seen so much violence, Australia has a fair share of violence, but you also grew up street fighting. Your siblings, your father, the clubs. You took your lessons in the street and you turned that into a very, very successful security business. You understood violence in a different way and developed a whole system for managing doors and like bodyguard security work. You competed around the world. You trained stick knife, kickboxing, all sorts of stuff. You're truly eclectic. And you were doing, when we met, you were doing what we call ballistic microfight scenario stuff. You had your own lingo. And it was funny when we first met, a bunch of people in the industry wanted us to fucking fight. They thought that you and I were going to hate each other, right?
Yeah.
And they contacted you to host the seminar up in Brisbane, and they thought, well, here's this cocky bastard who's telling everyone in around the world that they're not preparing properly for self-defense in me, and here's this cocky bastard in Australia, this guy Deane Lawler. They thought we were going to fucking hate each other and fight and maybe kill each other, and then they could take over the self-defense world with their silly.
That was the plan, yeah.
But we fell in love, and if we weren't married, we might be dating. If we hadn't gotten married, we might be dating.
we might be. I'm so concerned I'm going to hang up now.
Right? Do you remember those, like that period?
Yeah, I do. I think it was a strange time because it was the martial arts society was bordering on the contact phase. Yeah. We were starting to realize that traditional martial arts were struggling a little bit when it came to the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And we were people that were getting involved in it. We were going from one end of the spectrum to the other. Some people were transitioning slightly over. Others were going full on mad to one end, thinking it's got to be a bite, crawl, scratch, gouge, kick in the groin, throw on the ground, stomp on the head. So you get a variety, and you see everyone. If you go to like Europe and the UK and so on, you saw other variants over there where they had a different sense altogether. And I think one thing I really, really noticed was the different cultural aspects to the art. See, what works in the US or Canada might not necessarily work in Europe or the UK, and vice versa in Australia, because particular laws, particular cultural attitudes, places like Canada, the UK, certain parts of Europe and Australia had a very high propensity for people being kicked to death, for actually being bludgeoned to death. Whereas in the United States and a few other countries, they were being murdered or injured by either being shot or stabbed or in a different sense altogether. That I really did notice. I noticed that there were particular forms of the way people trained or particular attitudes they had about confronting people failed dismally here. But they might have been very successful over there. And that could have been due to their educational upbringing as well within their own schools, and like I said, in their own cultural background. That was a big difference for me. That's the first thing I noticed more than anything, was that there were techniques I'd look at and I'd go, well, mate, that wouldn't really work here. Do you remember that time we were in Canberra and one of the guys said, my Krav Maga instructor told me that, if you get robbed, just throw your wallet at them and then they'll run off and grab your wallet and you can run away and they won't get you. And I remember putting my hand up, and I think that was quite a few years ago. I don't know what year it was. But I said, my neighborhood, you wouldn't want to do that because we were a mixture of immigrants. We were poor, but the biggest thing about everyone in that area was respect. Have your own self-respect and have people respect you,
Mm-hmm.
If you would have thrown your wallet at one of the guys I knew in the neighborhood, they would have chased after you and beat you up for throwing the wallet at them. But then they would have stolen your money.
Right.
You know what I mean? So where it might work in one culture where you might get away with doing that, it's not going to work over here. Because at the time in that particular neighborhood, respect was more important than the money sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes.
It's interesting. I mean, you grew up with, I mean, let's jump around. First of all, a lot of people don't necessarily know who you are in my audience. I mean, I've referenced you in the past before, but how long have you been in the arts? What martial arts have you studied? Let's do a little background bio.
Okay, start off with like most people did in this country with judo. Judo onto karate and taekwondo, and then boxing. You know, I was always boxing.
Right.
I don't know if I was a good boxer because boxing hurts. But
Mhm.
then I got into the kickboxing when it became the trend to get out there and try it. I wanted to test myself. The biggest thing with me was I never really wanted to be a champion at anything. I didn't have any aspirations of being a world champion. I was very, very fortunate that I had the athleticism that I could easily jump on board and have a particular couple of fights and then do quite well at it. And I was very lucky, fortunately, you know, grace of God that I had those physical abilities. But I was always about testing things. My belief was that you couldn't teach kickboxing on a competitive sense unless you've actually jumped in there and competed yourself. The same
Right.
as the MMA or the NHB, the same as the point karate and taekwondo. Like my brothers and I used to go to the martial arts store and buy a karate gi outfit. Still had the creases in it. We'd go put it on, then jump into the competition that day. I was only telling a story to a guy the other day that Friday, Saturday, and Sunday one weekend, my brothers and I competed in the boxing on a Friday night. Then on Saturday morning, we entered a point karate tournament. And then Saturday night, we actually jumped into a kickboxing fight. And then Sunday, we jumped into a judo jiu-jitsu tournament on the Sunday. And we did that in one whole weekend. Like I
Right.
couldn't, now I'd have a heart attack or be bedridden for 6 months. You
Right.
know, but in those days at 18 and 19, you know, that's all you want to do. So we were
Right.
jumping into these things. Now, we wouldn't necessarily win every one of them, but we do pretty good, you know. But the thing was just testing, you know, it was always just trying to see what made him better than me and so on. And I was very fortunate. I ran into a lot of really, really excellent people, including yourself, that passed on knowledge and people and things that and people that I had learnt things or maybe directed me into a totally different direction altogether. And that was the biggest plus to it. And I think that's where people fall down when they stick to one for too long. I think you really do need to open your mind and open your eyes a little bit and see that the advantages to everything. My philosophy is maybe a little bit different than yours to the point where, and quote me if I'm wrong, please, but I believe any martial art can work. I think every martial art is effective. My biggest concern is I just don't think people know how to teach it to
Mm.
make it effective. I mean, there must have been at least one guy in the karate field or the kung fu field or whatever, or the tai chi field, that must have been able to fight. That's where he got all the moves from. But what happens as per anything, when you pass it on, it gets watered down, and then they start developing things to make it easier to teach and understand. And that's the paradox of realism, of reality, isn't it? Because the more drills you create, the more it becomes more of a choreographed dance
Right.
rather than reality. So that's the paradox.
Yeah.
So there has to be another aspect to it that makes it totally different. And in the end, the aspect that I found out after all those years of training was the emotional aspect. That was the biggest thing, the psychological, emotional aspect to it all. That's what made the difference. I used to work with a Shotokan black belt, and he was only a little guy, but man, he'd be doing upper cover blocks and reverse punches in a street fight and winning,
Mm.
fighting boxes and doing traditional karate moves, and you know, almost doing a kata in the car park. You
Right.
know, you know, and I was just like fascinated. But it was his upbringing and the way he came from a boxing family. He was always used to contact. He knew when to do the block. He knew what made the block effective. It was his emotional content, his emotional ability that made his karate work rather
Mm.
than the actual technique itself. And I think that's where we fall down is that the highest point of martial arts, the highest point of martial training should be to become free and not have to wrestle with the skill anymore.
Mm.
You know, because that's unfortunately everyone does it. Everyone wrestles with the skill. I do a particular move like this because this does that. But the key point is to be free of that, is to have those initial reactions, to that response to thing emotionally more so than anything. And that to me seems to be that's the common denominator, you know? Sorry.
No, I was gonna say that many times I've joked that Mike Tyson could have made Tai Chi work in the ring
100%.
because of his emotional balance. And that might sound like an oxymoron because he wanted to kill people, but what we're talking about there is he wasn't afraid of the violence, and that gave him that emotional grounding.
But also too, when you look at what Customoto did with his training, when he did his peekaboo boxing and everything, every drill didn't go for too long. They'd be short little spurts of things, and they'd be absolutely intense. And there was no real choreographed moves to it as such. I mean, you had to respond physically at 100% to do it. There was no slow motion moves. There was no, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to swing these punches and you're going to duck and weave and step to the side and throw a combination. And they're all short and intense. And I think that's really the key to everything in your training, is to make it explosive. But like I said, you need to make it emotional, because the old saying, the old Tony Robbins, whatever his name was, saying, we do anything to avoid pain, anything to gain pleasure. Well, I think that's really what it's all about. That's really what we're trying to do here. So if you want to make it pleasurable, you want to retain it. It's like I said, everyone, one thing in swimming that can't be taught, and everyone goes, oh, backstroke. And I go, no, the one thing in swimming that can't be taught is buoyancy. It's floating. Because you can't teach. You don't suddenly go, do this in the water and you'll be right. You can't do that. It doesn't work. You sink. But the funny thing about it, once you acquire the ability to float, you never forget it.
Mm-hmm.
You can never jump in a pool again 20 years later. You still can float. Same as riding a bike. Balance. You can't teach balance. You get training wheels, you learn how to get it, you get the feel, and once the body feels it, but you can jump on a bike at 100 years old. You might have only been on the bike once when you were 5.
Why are you looking at me when you...
Say again?
Why'd you look at me when you said you can jump on a bike when you're 100 years old?
Well, I was being polite.
Okay.
Because you're like Methuselah. You're like, well, you're about 135 or something now, aren't you?
So two things I want to interject here. One is I love the buoyancy metaphor. I've never heard that before. Because that is also, and I'm going to tie in Customato's biggest work, aside from those short explosive drills that he had Tyson doing, are very much, it made me think immediately of our ballistic microfight model.
Yeah,
which was always, every drill we did was 6 to 12 seconds long, and then it paused, but D'Amato's probably most unique contribution was that he taught all his fighters to embrace their fear. And if you listen to like all the interviews Tyson's doing now, and you talk about getting spiritual when you get older, like some of the stuff that he's talking about now with tears in his eyes is all about managing fear and everything he learned from Customato. But I want to come back to the buoyancy thing, because that moment when you take a kid or someone who's afraid of swimming and you teach them to swim, while they're afraid and very emotional, they sink. When they trust, they float. And then it's that sensation of it's almost like that intersection between the body and the psychology. I'm going to float, and there's not I never thought about that. That's very I didn't realize you were so deep. Interesting.
But see, that's the paradox. As I was talking to Elisa earlier on, the paradox with training, especially reality-based training, is that the more drills you create, the more it becomes like a dance, and you lose that excitement. So every time you practice a drill, it's got to have that emotional content to it. It's got to be different. It's got to feel like it's the first time it's occurring again and again and again. I'm not a great believer in, you see a lot of people standing there and shouting at people, screaming and shouting at a guy. Listen, okay, the first time you do it to a guy in a class that you've never met before, it might be awe-inspiring. But, by the second or third turn, you're going, you start questioning what's he doing. You start laughing at him almost because it's no longer real. It doesn't have the same effect. So I think you have to be very careful when it comes to your training. Short spurts of training, I think, are great, and you've got to make it interesting. You've got to make it change. I'll give you an example. I do with a knife. I do a drill where I love working off walls. The great thing I love about walls is that someone can slam you hard into it, and it's that impact that shocks the living hell out of you. And you know yourself that every time you have an impact against your body, every time someone punches you, or every time you punch someone, you actually hold your breath. You actually don't breathe. So as soon as I shove you in the chest, you actually hold your breath for a second. And then the double impact is your back hitting the wall again, and then you freeze. And it's like, whoop, and you go a bit stiff, a bit shocked, and then straight into something. So they're great ways of training. If you get the person to shut their eyes, it's even better. And even if they've done it a million times before, every time they shut their eyes, it's still new again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you get a different feeling to it. Like I like to get people, if they're about a meter away from the wall, then I'll make them half a meter away from the wall. Then I'll get them a meter and a half away from the wall. Then I'll get them 2 meters away from the wall and shove them as hard as possible. And they don't really, when their eyes shut, they've got some idea of how far away they are, but they're not too sure. But I was training some police officers, and they're pretty well trained guys. They seem to know what they're doing. And we're doing some, the guys trying to stab you and whatever against the wall. Shut your eyes, open your eyes up. Well, shoved in the wall, open your eyes up, knife comes at you. Whoa, what's going on there? And they thought it was great. But after a while, they started learning the emotional content to gain control of that. So what I did then is when I told them to shut their eyes, I actually got someone to kneel down behind them, which they didn't know. So now when they were shoved, they actually fell over this person, lost the balance, hit the ground, then the guy come and stabbed them. What I found amazing was that the guy that was doing the best in the class, this guy was just like, ex-army, trained killer. He was scared of me just looking at him. But once he lost his balance and fell over on the ground, the 60-kilo girl who had the knife pretty much stabbed him to death. And he just there going, flailing his arms and his legs, and he didn't know what the hell was going on. So it's that emotional change always in your training that creates those specific drills. If you do it any longer than a minute, it loses its effectiveness. Even a minute coming right to the end of its span. I think 30 seconds or 10-second bursts, then stop, reevaluate, change it over, and don't do reps. Don't do like, a dozen reps of the same guy in a row. You have a go, you have another go, 3 at the max, then change around, do someone else, and not the same partners. I do this rotational wall drill, which I think I mentioned once before when we were talking. And what I do is you might have 5 guys facing the wall, 5 guys backs against the wall, and they'll fight each other or do their techniques, and then they'll rotate clockwise or counterclockwise. So you always got the threat of being into a corner against the wall, and you can't move, you have to face it. And then you've got the ability to be open, to be able to move away. And that changes as it rotates. You never really know who you're going to get in the line. It's a different guy at the time. And sometimes you'll get, you look at the big guy at the end, you think, God, I hope I don't get him. And next thing you know, bang, you've got him. You go, oh, God, I'm going to get killed. And I think that's the whole idea of that emotional content. The more you do it, the better you become at that spontaneous reaction rather than trained reaction. Like I said before, you want to be free of having to wrestle with that skill all the time. It's not being a guitar player, you can sit there and look at your fingers and look where the chords are all the time and over, but really what you want to do is be able to sit there and enjoy the music without having to look at where your fingers are going. Wrestling with that skill, yeah?
So, but what about so a couple of things. One is, you said something pretty provocative, and this, maybe you're just getting mellow in your old age. You said that all arts are theoretically effective, and as my paraphrasing, and I agree. And the origin of that stuff was fighting was very organized, even violent encounters. If it was 2 samurais that were going to slice each other up, there's a tea ceremony and meeting at a certain time, and even to the point of like, the 2 commanders would ride up on each other's horse and go, last chance to surrender. And nobody thought, well, I'll just shoot this fucker right now. There was a code. You'd go back, and then somebody would sound a bugle, dueling, and all that. I think violence has changed so much, so rapidly in the last few years, certainly. But even, I mean, you've told me some classic stories working the door of chaos when you were learning. And I think what I want to point out, just for my own clarity in my audience and the way my head looks at it, I always say this: like, everything works in a demo, and what the problem is in anything, whether it's a drill or a real violent attack, is what we call ACP: awareness, consent, and preparation. Awareness, consent. If there's no awareness, there's always a neurobiological reaction. What you were talking about, when you close your eyes and you get hit, you were describing, in other words, what I've been, for 40 years saying, start to flinch, right? The body executive function is hijacked. The mind goes, what the fuck, right? The body has a micro flinch or a major flinch, depending on your training. And you've got to recalibrate that before you can do anything. So totally agree with all of that. The emotional stuff I love, and when Deane says emotional, what I'm talking in our language here, it's managing fear.
That's right.
Because when you don't manage fear, then psychological fear takes your head somewhere else, and now you're fighting two demons. My favorite quote from Dan Millman, he said, "When you face just one opponent and you doubt yourself, you're outnumbered." So you got to believe in yourself. But like your Shotokan friend, and I can remember street fights that I had when I was young. With fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, and then you would square off. And so you could go shitty street fighter versus Wing Chun guy, wrestler versus, like the way the UFC first started.
Yeah.
And people would square off. But if do you remember? I don't know if we can talk about it. Do you remember that incident? And you can. I'm going to give you very, very vague stuff in case you don't want to talk about it. That incident that happened when you were
one of the brothel.
Oh,
okay, sorry, not that one.
No,
okay.
Not that one. The one in the Philippines where you're going around making a bunch of people look bad. And some guy shorter than you came up and had to talk to you and explain that please don't do that to us. Our culture doesn't like that. I'm trying to be vague here. Do you remember the thing with the knife that?
Well, it wasn't really like it sort of like that. What it was that I went to a particular place where a guy had met many years earlier who was a knife fighter. I was asking questions. I was saying, look, do you know where these guys train? Who's this guy? Who's that guy? And so on. And what happened was that some of the guys that were part of the scene took offense to it, thinking, who's this Westerner coming in here asking questions? And I remember this little guy walks up to me and says, mate, you're a knife fighter. And I said, oh, yeah, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I was only young, and he scared the living hell out of me. He goes, what type of knife fighter are you? Next thing you know, Terrain, he's got this knife right down near my leg, near my groin. I was like, I'm not that good a knife fighter. Actually, I'm not even a knife fighter at all. I'm just looking for a friend. So,
I like to take private lessons.
Yeah. So you change the mentality.
Deane's leaving out some details because of where we are, but the way I remember to describe it is the guy was super in close to you, and then talking to you, and next thing you know, he had the blade up under like inside of, going, hey, I'm going to circumcise you.
Yes, it was a violent encounter. Let's just say that it was a violent encounter that definitely woke me up to reality. But in the end, we ended up becoming friends. He ended up being a pretty cool dude, and they're good. But at the time, it was quite fun.
And my point about all of that is, and everyone listening, is this guy knew exactly what to do to get super close and have it get his weapon out without. And listen, Deane is very well known for his knife fighting and knife defense system, and so I'm explaining this because what I was trying to shine a light on is organized fighting, even if it's violent, like had the guy said, fuck you and done this, he still might have harmed you. You might have beaten him.
Of course.
But there was ACP, awareness, consent, preparation. The most dangerous fighters aren't going to fucking telegraph and announce. And even you've had some crazy fights at the door. And what was the crazy? But I remember one.
I'll tell you, you've been, when you are working the front door, the fact is the one that gets you is the guy that smiles, the guy that just totally unarms you.
Yeah.
He's smiling and happy. And I used to say, and I say now to a lot of guys, when someone walks in there laughing and smiling and happy, I always say to guys, keep an eye on him. Because the guy that's too happy sometimes ends up being the guy that's too sad.
Okay.
A lot of people that are very sad on the inside, smile and laugh a lot, but they're very, very lonely. Well, you start to really know. And as they take in excess alcohol, then that changes the attitude. But I had a couple of guys one time come in, and they were tourists and totally unarmed me at the door. They were friendly, nice, and it was getting late. They went inside, and next thing you know, one of them come out and hit me over the head with a bottle. And it turned on all in. And I still remember feeling the blood coming down the side of my face. And there was a tree at the front of the door, and these guys are into me, and they were beating the living hell out of me. And I still remember, and this is the weirdest things you remember when you're in a fight. And I have to interject with one little story. I met a martial artist many years ago who had a bit of a name. And I remember him telling me a story when he got into a fight. And he was saying, man, I was standing there and this guy swung a punch at me and I stepped off at 45 degrees. And then I moved in and then I stepped off again at 30 degrees. And then I moved over and did a 180-degree turn. And I think to myself, what's this guy got a fucking protractor in his pocket or something when he's out having a fight? How do you know how many degrees he stepped? And to go back to my story, one thing I know is as I was these guys getting stuck into me, and I remember falling to the tree, and I thought, as soon as I felt my back onto the tree, I thought, well, I had some type of support there. It was like a bit of a comfort. It's like having a special pillow or something there. And I remember looking down, and I could just see this guy's feet. And his foot was right next to my foot. And I'm thinking to myself, well, his foot's next to my foot. That means I can reach out and touch him. So, man, I shut my eyes and I swung as hard as I could with the best left hand I've ever thrown in my life. And without a word of a lie, it connected, dropped him. As soon as it dropped him, I don't know what it is about the way your body reacts or the way your mind works. But that sudden instant shot of adrenaline, suddenly I woke up. From being stunned, suddenly I was aware. And then in turn, I got stuck into the other couple of guys and sorted it all out in the end. But that's the stories that bother me the most when I hear people telling me about how they stepped off at 45 or they stepped off here and they did that, because I tell you, I don't remember any of those things. It's such a jumble. It's such a madness. And violence is such an awful thing. I mean, it's very frightening, even to someone that dips into it all the time. It's still an awful thing. It upsets your whole day, your whole night, because most of the times you want to go to work and go home. That's it. End of story. Not have to be faced with some clown who decides that, he wants to mess up your day because he hasn't had a good day himself.
Here's a deep question and an interesting one, because, the Deane in this picture was of a different spiritual, emotional, psychological place than the Deane I'm talking to now.
Oh yeah.
And so
there's still a bit of innocence there,
right? But
I think that's yeah.
It's funny, and I don't know where your left hand is, but I just remember I was smiling. You
don't want to know what the left hand was, mate.
Right? I always tell people, like, what's important to you when you're 20 to 30 changes when you're 30 to 40, changes when you have a kid, when you start a business, changes when you're 40 to 50. And to come back to what you said at the beginning, as we get older, we get more spiritual.
Yeah.
We've got a little bit more wisdom. I always hated violence. Like, did you, or is this new? Like you said, like the chaos.
No, always hated it. I came from a very, very violent household where everything was fixed and everything was destroyed with violence.
Mm.
The response to everything was violence. That was it. There was nothing else. That was how it was. We were a normal family, and then all of a sudden, due to particular situations, domestic situations, then it'd be mega violent, and the next day it'd be back to normal again. And so my wife would always say for years, and my friends would always say, "How come you can have a joke after a violent encounter? How can you just suddenly change like that? How can like I'll have an argument with my wife, and then 5 minutes later I'll go, 'Hey, do you want a cup of tea? Do you want a coffee?' And then she goes, 'Are you kidding me?' And I go, 'Well, come on, let's go get a sandwich or something.' She goes, 'What?' And I'll do that because that's how I was raised. It was mad violence, physical violence, and then, come on, let's go get takeouts, or come on, let's go watch TV. It was so weird. And
Right.
I suppose that gave me this ability to be able to turn off and turn on. But I think it goes to the old saying, one man's fear is another man's excitement. And because of that upbringing, that's what it really did with me. So every time I was scared, I would try to make that fear into something exciting. Because
Mm.
like anything, you understand, surprise equals entertainment. We do anything to avoid pain, anything to gain pleasure, as they say. If it's painful, we'll do whatever we can to get away from it. And we don't want to remember the old painful days and breakups and
Sure.
all these sort of things. We want to remember the good days, And when people do bring things up, what do? You get uncomfortable. What I try to do is that when I get fear or nervousness, and I used to say to all my guys, I would say, start to enjoy that feeling. Like, make
Mhm.
it fun. I know it sounds awful, but make it fun. My wife said a really weird thing to me one time. We got into a fight when we were young. Not me and her, but these guys had a go at me, and the guy ended up having to pick up a fence paling with nails in it and swung it at me and stabbed me in the back with it. And I ended up beating him up and his mate up and whatever. And my wife said, swear to God, she said, that looked like you were actually smiling while it was occurring. And I said, don't be so weird. I'm not that strange. But I probably was.
Right.
Because I think when you turn that fear into excitement, you perform so much better. You
Mhm.
enjoy it so much more. When you're excited to go do something, you're like, yeah, you can do anything. You can jump over that rock, you can swing from that tree. But when you're hesitant and fearful, you just can't do it. You can't perform. So I think,
It's
yeah,
it's interesting. You and I are very, very similar, and the harder I would get hit, the stronger it would make me. I always had do you remember like Benny the Jet?
mhm,
When he'd get dropped and he'd be down on one knee. I remember once he got rocked, took a knee, looked up, smiled at the guy, nodded his head,
yeah.
and got up and just beat the shit out of him. But it was like that. Oh, you could.
Well, a
It
lot of
was that
people forget that,
energetic
right?
shift.
A
What's
lot of
that?
people forget that. A lot of people forget that. When they see that, they go, "Oh, that really hurt him." He's smiling because it's covering up his pain. Yeah, of course it is. But the fact is also what he's telling himself is that, yeah, that was great. Come on, do it to me again. And so he enjoyed it. As he enjoys it, the excitement increases and he performs better. I mean, that's it. That's really how it works. I mean, that's how you want it. Look, I told the guys, we used to do a training thing. I used to tell the guys that, when you're driving along, if a cat or a dog jumps out in front of you, or a small child on a bike or something, and you have to put the brakes on, or you saw the cops in the background, put the brakes on, and they get the heart pump, pump, pump. I'd say, pull over and stop, start throwing punches,
Mhm.
and start, making that response to you being violent. And uh, I told the guys it's a great way of training. And so some of the guys that do it and come back and tell me stories about how people look at them really weird. But I remember I this dog jumped in front of the car and I've jammed the brakes and I've gone, whoa, and I've come and stopped at the lights and I've gone, whoa, and I stopped and I could feel my heart there. So I start, I look off the side of me and there's this woman in her car and she just looks at me and next thing she winds a window up and locks the door, like
Right.
is going to jump out of the lights and beat the hell out of her or something. But I think it's learning how to get understanding that. And as I said before, that surprise equals entertainment. You've got to make it so that it's exciting rather than fearful. And
Mm.
it's really hard for people to relate to that. But, after a while, that's where I think you get people, when there's been a battle that you turn around, hit your chest and hit high five each other. And
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like you want the next one to happen. You know, you really don't, but it's like, yeah, we made it. We've
It's
done it.
it's interesting and so subtle. I don't know if you ever heard this story. I haven't told it a lot. Little Nicky, when he was 7 years old, we were on a trip in LA, and I was walking around Melrose Avenue looking at like thrift stores and looking at stuff. And he's walking around, and they had this glass table, like a showcase, but it had a protruded edge that you couldn't see at his height. And he looked down into the showcase and smashed the top of his head right at that sensitive spot against the
Oh,
glass. And he starts screaming like right away. And I'm
yeah.
not beside him, but it's this thrift shop that's like overloaded with clothes and racks. So he's screaming. I find him, and he's holding his head. So I realize what happened right away. And I grab him and pick him up, and I'm looking at his head, and he's wailing like as if I had just beat him. And all these people in the store are looking at me, and I'm going, oh my God, they think I just hit him or something. Like, so
Yeah.
I get really embarrassed, and I run to the bathroom because I want to make sure that he's not bleeding, not cut. And I put him down, and I look at him. He's like, oh, and I go, dude, you're not cut. You're fine. You're cool. And he's going, oh, my head. And I looked at him. You just made me think about this story. And I said, Nick, look at me. And I put my hand up like a focus pad. I said, I want you to smash my hand right now. Fucking hit my hand like some bully at school just smashed you. And I need you to hit my hand. And he goes, Dad, not now. I don't want your lessons now. And I said, hit me in the hand right now. Do it. And he goes, Dad, I go, hit my fucking hand. And he goes like this. He goes like he's like pissed off at me, right? So he does like a really shitty, like, punch. And I was
Yep.
like, oh, Mr. Bully, oh, he's gonna stop from that. Nick, come on, fucking nail my hand. And he goes, Dad, I don't want to. And he hits my hand. I go, that all you got? And he goes, wham, and he nails it again. And he's like breathing hard. He throws a really good right, boom, nails it. And I go, and he's like this. He goes, you happy? And he's like, and I go, hey, did you notice you stopped crying? How's your head? And he goes, and he's like starts wailing again like 7-year-olds. But it made me think exactly of doing that. And I love what you did. I'm going to share it with other students because it's classical conditioning. If you get afraid and you take that energy and you direct it into something practical and tactical, then that fear will fuel that action the next time if you do it enough times. It becomes that Pavlovian cue of it's something like something happens, a family member or the pandemic shit or something in business, and I'd get like a fear spike, like, oh fuck, and you get that big butterflies in your stomach, and I immediately will go like bang out push-ups or go hit something so that it redirects that energy into something practical and tactical.
Look, I think, as I said earlier on, it really is all about the emotion. The question I always had as a young guy was that you'd go to the bar and you would see this overweight fat guy sitting on the stool, and he'd be the bouncer, and he'd be hitting back shots while working, and he would not have any real skill. You can tell straight away he's not punching the bag every day and doing push-ups and sit-ups.
Right.
He just looked like a slob. Yet when the shit hit the fan, he would respond so well, and he'd fight guys and drag guys out whenever. And then he'd go back to having his drink on the stool again. That always absolutely fascinated me because I kept thinking, well, why are all these guys doing these hours and hours of training every day and whatever? Here's this guy who's doing absolutely nothing. He just responds immediately. And that made me realize that it's more about the emotional content sometimes than the actual skill. And then what happens is your attention then goes more to the threat than the skill itself. Whereas I think what happens in martial arts, after a while, people get to the point where they spend more time on the skill than the actual threat that initiated the action of them starting the training.
Hmm.
You talk about the three martials, martial arts, martial sports, and martial skills. And to reiterate that for people that don't know what they are, martial arts is learning, the culture, the stylized movements. You can always tell a praying mantis guy from a Wing Chun guy and from a karate to a judo guy by the way they move, And then you've got martial sports, like the kickboxing, the boxing, the kyokushin karate tournaments, the BJJ, the judo competition, so on. And that's martial sports, a one-on-one, set rules. You can't do this, you can't do that, and so on. And then you've got martial skills, which is really the military way, the idea of kill or be killed, straight up, chop, chop, kick in the groin, kill the bloke, that's it, end of story. But I think people forget the fourth one, which is martial purpose. And we all tend to forget that. What was your initial purpose of training? And what happens is we go in there thinking, I want to learn self-defense and I want this. And then within 6 months, we're more concerned about fitness. Within 6 months, we're more concerned about whether we do the right kata properly, or more concerned about whether we're doing the right stylized backhand mantis strike. And I think that's where we fall down, is we lose that martial purpose. And you need to always have that purpose in your training continuously over and over and over again, if self-defense is your initial goal.
Right.
So you're, and it's really amazing when I ask people, so if you get attacked, I said, where should your attention be, on the actual threat or on the skill? And you'd be amazed. I get a lot of trained martial artists go, the skill, you really need to learn that particular block to stop this. And I go, no, it's not that. Your attention should be always on the threat, and everything should be based on the threat. If we go back to that drill I said against the wall, it's really amazing. If my eyes are open, my hands are down, and I'm going to push you, and I said, I shove you into the wall really hard, and then you fall back and your hands come up, and then I swing the big punch at you, and say we do your technique, I do a spear action into the arm, and it looks great. Everyone goes, wow. After a while, that becomes very choreographed. Even if you get shoved hard, it's still choreographed because you know what's coming. But it's really amazing. You'll see a guy where he'll fall back and his hands will be this far forward when he hits against the wall. His hands will come to the cover. But if you shut his eyes and shove him in the wall, he'll fall the wall and his hands will be this close.
Mm.
They'll be this close, because he'll go in that defensive shell naturally. And then he'll do his spear action, but his spear action won't be as accurate or as strong or as effective as what the first one was, because of that emotional change again. And so that's the thing I always noticed. And you talk about getting old as well. It's really amazing, because as we get older, we tend to like to bring everything in close to us. So we start doing exercises where our hands are as close to our body as possible, when really what we should be concentrating on is exercising with our arms away from our body, because that's really what we want to try to achieve. Because the biggest thing we lack when we get older is this ability to reach out and grab something and pick it up, because we feel weak. We try to bring everything in close all the time. So I think the mentality changes, but really that emotional content is what it's all about. The understanding and keeping your attention on the threat more so than on trying to get the skill. That's why you get the guy, the untrained guy, goes to the local football player, goes out there and beats up 6 people at a bar, and they're all trained killers. I've seen it. I've seen guys 10 years on the front door get beaten up by the local football player. And because this guy just goes for it. He just swings everything under the sun and picks up chairs and crash tackles the guy on the ground and jumps on the bloke, throws something at another bloke. And there's no skill there, but it is skillful in an extent. But it's like, I don't believe in, if you look at that point as being your goal of self-defense, I think you should look, instead of having a goal setting, it should, you have an emotional setting. How does it feel? When you get people where they go, I'm going to get that car and I'm going to get that job and the world, and I'm going to feel it's going to be it. That's it. I have everything. And they get it and they suddenly go, no, it's not what I expected.
Mm-hmm.
Like when they come to train, you get people that come to seminars, right? And they go, they hear all about you, they get there and they do it. They go, yeah, it was good, but it really wasn't what I expected.
Right.
And I think the problem with that is that we have these goals, these ideals. If we're going to do this is how I'm going to do it. You've got to have an emotional feel about it. You've got to say to yourself, how do I want to feel? when I do this. And I think that's really the benefit I see from the training. When I'm teaching people, I'm not about how many techniques you learn. I'm all about is how you felt at the end of it. What emotional response did you get from it? Do you feel comfortable now? Do you feel that you could handle something if you walked out that door? If they say no, then I've failed. I haven't done my job.
Let's go down that path for a little bit on training. You've had a very, very you've been in martial arts for decades. You've had street stuff. You built I don't know how big your security. You've got 3 different companies that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your the
We were
apparel.
pretty big there. Yep, we were pretty big in the security there for a while. I've really, really cut that down due to the fact is that I've just got older and I really don't want to have the hassle.
At the height of your running security, how many employees did you have? How many staff?
About 330, 340.
Yeah.
And we're probably down to about 100 now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and you've got your Lawler Training Center.
Yep.
And that's you're hard to find. How do people get trained by you? Do you have instructors now? Is it just are you
Oh, look,
mentoring?
I have a couple of guys that teach here and there, but it's really funny. I've really based everything on community. I mean, I'm a real community-based trainer. I'm not out there for the dollar. There are seminars I've done over the years and I've made absolutely not 1 cent. It's cost me money.
Mm-hmm.
And look, and I don't mean to frown upon people that do this for a living or whatever, but to me, it's always been a community thing for me, especially because of the domestic violence I was brought up in. I suppose I've always looked at it as a way of trying to put something back into the community to help people overcome their fears. Because
Right.
domestic violence is a terrible thing for a kid. You always feel guilty. You always feel like you've never done enough. You become afraid of your own shadow, and it's so easy for it to get out of control. We were very, very lucky, my brothers and I, that we were smart enough, intelligent enough, and had a strong mother who also directed us in the right direction as well. And it's very difficult. So I think my training is very community based. I am changing that now, but I am sort of going more down a financial sense, a more monetary thing to it, because I'm sort of looking at it more as a semi-retirement thing where I want to actually do it 3 or 4 days a week and maybe make a little bit of money out of it and enjoy it rather than having to just drop in and do everything for free all the time. But I get a lot of people that can't afford training. They come and train with me. I get a lot of people like that, but I enjoy it. But I enjoy seeing the responses. I enjoy seeing the responses. I'm a weird dude, I'll see violence and I'll start laughing at it, and like my kids and my wife always thought I was quite strange. I'll be sitting at a restaurant and there'll be a fight over the side there or a bar, and I'll just sit there and I'll keep eating because it's like I said before, like there's levels of violence to people. Yourself when you're doing your seminars, you get some people and someone goes, "Shut up," and they go, "Oh my God. That was so violent." Yeah, well, you're kidding me, aren't you? Like to me, I've got to the point now where unless the guy's pulled a knife or a gun, or there's 3 guys on the one, it's not violent to me. I see 2 guys having a tussle with each other, and they're grabbing each other, and I go, "Look at these 2 idiots." I mean, I don't even get fazed by it. I just look at it and go, I'll walk up and go, "Mate, cut us out, will you? Just go away. You piss off. Go over there." It's nothing.
Right.
So I think there's levels of it. And I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to attune people to the levels where they become comfortable in that point. Not where they become foolish and become overly brave and think, I'm not going to bother. I'm still very aware that you can die from a push.
Right.
Trip over, hit your head and die. I'm fully aware of that. But I don't get to the point of that anxiety level, where it becomes mad.
Right.
I get stories from guys that work for me. "Oh, boss, you should have seen it. It almost went down." And I go, "So it didn't happen?" No, it almost went down. I said, "So it didn't happen?" "Yeah, but we could have." I said, "But you didn't." I mean, it's really amazing. You know, they come and tell me this huge. I had a guy write me a 3-page report one day about a guy that shouted at him and got within his space and did that, and he felt threatened for his life or whatever. And I'm reading the story, and I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. And so, in other words, it was 3 pages about nothing that happened. It would have, could have, and it should have, but it didn't. You know,
Right. You
and so
tell the guy he's in the wrong business. He needs to be a storyteller, not a
100%.
announcer.
You know, there are guys that type of thing. And I hear people that walk up to me sometimes and tell me, "Oh, you're Deane. Oh, yeah, mate." You know, I'll be people introduce me to friends, and they'll go, "Oh, yeah, I've heard about you, man. I was once in a situation when this guy did this to me." And I said, "So he didn't do anything to you?" And some people might think I'm arrogant or rude when I act that way, but the fact is, I go, I don't want to hear a story about something that didn't happen.
Right.
You know? I mean,
Unless the only thing I'll add to that, because and I'll pop this up here. So in our system, we've got this whole thing of timeline of violence.
Yep.
And most people practice. You said earlier, you talked about focusing on martial skill versus the scenario.
Yep.
And understanding the threat. So when you use the term threat, and so I use the timeline of violence, like your situational awareness, your internal self-talk, what are you saying to the guy to morally, ethically, legally de-escalate it, but maybe also set him up for what you guys call a king hit if you need to preemptively move.
Yep.
But that might be a wrong term because king hit's like a sucker punch. But anyways,
yep.
But in the timeline of violence concept here for everyone listening, I've had lots of students that say, hey, somebody was following me or somebody did this, and I did stuff in D1, D2, and nothing happened. And I just want to point out that that's very different than the situations that Deane's describing. When a graduate of our program or a client of ours says, hey, this almost happened, but I did this, and they're talking about deploying a strategy that successfully allowed them to avoid or de-escalate, different than somebody emotionally coming up to like Deane or going, I almost got killed last night. And
yeah, exactly. I almost got killed, almost got run over.
Right. Let me ask you this, because we're at the top of the hour here, and I'm going to go through, guys. If anyone has any questions, of course, it's early in the morning in Australia, and I think only Bruno's on here from Melbourne, but we've got we've got New Jersey, Oklahoma, Maryland. Where else do we got here? Spain watching, Texas, Canada. Guys, while I sort of package an ending together here, improvise an ending, any questions that you have for Deane, drop them in the comments below. There was one earlier, and this one here, where Jeff Vernon is asking Earl Montague. Did you know Earl? Did you ever?
I knew Earl Montague, yep. I think Earl originally was a professional wrestler. I think he was a wrestler and he did his Tai Chi. And I think that's what made his Tai Chi quite effective as well.
He was a big man.
He was a big dude. Yeah. I like Earl.
Yeah. I went to visit him on his ranch. And that was, again, I was terrified there because you'd be walking around. I'd be like going, come look, walk through the hills, look at this. And I'm like, hey, do you have like dangerous snakes out here? Like while we're walking? And he goes, oh yeah, by the way, your most dangerous snake in the US is our 7th most dangerous here. I'm like, holy shit, what else do I need to watch out for? Well, watch out for these spiders and watch out for these critters. And I was like, he's like pointing, you see that tree over there? And I'm just like looking at the grass, looking at the rocks. But Earl was cool. I spent a couple of days with him at his place. I think he even did an article on me or with me in one of the magazines that he wrote about, and he was cool. But I had and it was super interesting when we got together, like when you and I hit it off in the same way. A lot of people, when they think when big personalities get together, like like there's going to be fireworks.
Yep.
And Earl and I didn't even talk about martial arts at all. We're talking about our families, talking about life, talking about, and somebody asked me about that. I said, like because you just respect each other. You just get nothing to prove. We're not going to fight. We're not going to go like whose kung fu is better. This isn't a Shaw Brothers movie. And when you see that type of like petty psychological fireworks in people, it's a real sign of like insecurity in people. But
mate, I out of every so-called famous martial artists in the world that I've met so many that just want to prove to you that they're better.
Right.
And it's so disappointing. You know, the old saying, you know, be careful meeting your heroes.
Right.
You know, you're going to be sorely disappointed. You know, well, I've been sorely disappointed many, many times meeting my so-called heroes. I meet them and I think to myself, why do people want to come and train with this idiot?
Right.
You know, I mean, this guy's a fool, you know, and he's talking about magic, you know. And then again, I've met other people too where I've been absolutely overwhelmed. I've enjoyed it. Like you talk about meeting people. It's like when I first met Joe Louis. You know, I sat down with Joe Louis with having sushi with him, and we spoke for an hour or so, and we didn't talk about martial arts in any way, shape, or form. We spoke everything but.
Right.
You know, and the great thing about that was that when that happened, then he started telling me about things about Bruce Lee and what he's done and how he trained and so on. And he was like two guys talking, and I really enjoyed it. I must admit, I've learned more from the old masters, if you want to call them that, by sitting down and talking to them, having coffee with them, than actually training with them.
Sure.
Because you listen to their experiences, their background. You know, like I was very fortunate to train with two very well-known Filipino martial art instructors. That was Kako Cañete and Carlos Navarro, who actually ended up fighting each other, I think, at one stage there for one of the last stiff fights to the death, if you want to call it. You know, where they no gear on at all, just beat the hell out of each other. And I was very fortunate to train with these two guys. And it's really funny because their backgrounds, there was a bit of a parallel in their background, you know, with the violence and so on, where they've trained. But like I said, I've learned more from listening to people's backgrounds and where they've come from than I've actually learned from learning the technique itself. Like Benny Jet, I had a great time sitting with Benny, talking about his background, his family, and what he do, where he's going. I think last time I spoke to him, I actually got him a jacket that we actually made at our factory, and gave him a jacket, and he took it with him on his smoking ceremony. So I think he's part Blackfoot Indian or something, or forgive me, wrong Indian, but you know, so you learn so much more from the person that way rather than talking about.
Well, here's another thing also to think about. Aside from you're obviously intelligent. I know you got a voracious book collection, and you love like looking at those old books of you know, seeing ancient photography and going, oh, look at that, that's lists and origins. But you made me think about something in our spear system instructor courses. We've got a slide up where we talk about the difference between like a coach and a teacher, where a teacher says, learn this information, and a coach wants to inspire you to perform. And the psychology is completely different. So in the spirit of how you say, I want to know how you feel, that's a coaching essence, as opposed to, hey, next week there's going to be a test, you better know these 7 kicks. And now people are memorizing like technique. And we always tell people like that the fixation on technique is your single greatest hindrance to spontaneity in a real violent encounter. Because you're focusing on how to move as opposed to when to move and why to move. But we would ask this question. I don't know if you ever heard me talk about this. I would say to people in the class, how many of you know who, Muhammad Ali is? And everyone, well, of course. How many of you know who Sugar Ray Leonard is? Well, of course. Did you know that Angelo Dundee trained both Sugar Ray Leonard and Ali? And they're like, oh yeah, okay, I didn't really know that. A lot of people don't know. You know that, of course. And I go, if you had one opportunity for a photo op and to spend 15 minutes talking, who would you pick, Ali or Dundee? And everyone goes Ali. And I go, I let them all answer. And then I go, I pick Dundee. You know why? Because Ali might not be able to teach me anything about self-defense or fighting, but I know that Dundee can. You want to spend time, you want to have lunch with a coach, somebody who's figured out how to inspire performance and movement.
Mm-hmm.
Because the learning that kick or learning that punch or that counter, that's just biomechanic proficiency. You can learn that through reps. But getting the essence, like when you're sitting down with the masters or the people that have figured it out, and kind of like through osmosis, picking up that sense of balance and essence and integrity, that's cool.
Well, it's fascinating. It's fascinating when you look at it, because some of the greatest fighters in the world can be the worst coaches you could ever meet.
Right.
And you get some of the worst fighters in the world can be the best coaches. I mean, that's how it works. But to reiterate, to go back, like you said before, exactly what I was mentioning. You want to be free and not having to wrestle with the skill, so you can concentrate more on the threat than the actual skill itself, which is where people fall down in their training. It's all about, like I said before, that emotion. But also, yeah, I totally agree. If you want to sit down and talk to Angelo Dundee, you'd be asking him questions like, okay, then Ali might have had 1,000,001 physical attributes that made him great. But, how did you train them?
Right.
What direction did you put him? What direction did you point him in? How did you build up to it?
I was going to say
that loss or that move. Yeah.
Yeah. So those of you who are parents, guardians, mentors, and there's a lot of martial artists and defensive tactics instructors and combatives coaches that listen to the No Fear podcast. So this is interesting. I remember reading in Angelo's book that to the point is getting Ali to move and to train. He had physical attributes, and he had obviously like proximity sense and timing that other fighters didn't have. He's fucking Ali. But to Deane's point is understanding psychology and how to get in somebody's head. And I remember when his book, he said that Ali didn't like if you told him what to do. He liked to believe that he came up with the strategy. He was one of those little kids that like, hey, check this out. And so when Angelo discovered that in coaching him, he would do things like with Bundini Brown on the side. He would say loud enough for Ali to hear, but never directly to him. Things like, this combination could work against who he's fighting next. I don't know if Ali could make that happen. So Ali would hear that, then start working it on the bag and go, hey, check this out, right? He like a little kid, he wanted to know that he had come up with it. So it's super, super interesting, that psychology. So parents out there, mentors, coaches, understanding the psychology, and harder to do in a group class, but still the lessons there. Deane, we've got a few questions for you here, and I don't want to keep you too long. I don't like to keep these much longer than an hour, but these questions, I'm going to pop them up. Dave Haynes asks this. Dave is a police officer who trains in our system, but he asks, would you describe the bouncer who is fat and drinking as someone with a mindset that enabled him to react to an encounter, like a predator type mentality?
Look, you could, but I think more so it's someone who's comfortable with that environment. That's how I look at it. Is he a predator? Well, look, he may be. There are some absolute shithouse bouncers out there that really, and I'm very lucky that I've never belted a drunk person who couldn't fight. The guys who I got into a fight were guys that could handle themselves, that actually threatened me rather than me threaten them. So yes, of course, I totally agree, Dave. You can get someone who has a predator type mentality, but I think also too, it can also be the mentality where they are very, very comfortable with the environment. I mean, that's really the key to the job. You should be honest. If you are good at your job, you shouldn't have to lay a hand on anyone.
Right.
Let's be honest. But there are times where you have to, whether you like it or not.
Right. And Dave, as a police officer, you know that, and I think that the reality is, if you look back at this picture here, Deane and I have both put on a little bit of weight since those days. but we're both comfortable with violence, but we're not predators, right? So in that
Exactly,
sense,
yeah. The
in that
exact
sense,
opposite. If anything, we probably despise the predator. Like I
yeah,
see them, I can smell them. Like, even
yeah,
when I'm interviewing guys for a job, I can tell a guy who's there for no other reason, but he's there for the glory of the hunt.
yeah.
I see that. I see it in those.
And that actually ties in to this next question, which is kind of cool. Michael asks, way back, 130 security bouncers and doormen, I believe, are different. Do you find you select people to bounce who you wouldn't choose to work the door? The difference between uh, a doorman and bouncer, or
Okay,
in
yeah, totally.
Australia, is that the same?
Okay, yep, mate, yep, totally, yep, 100%. You get look, the guy who does the door is the guy who can talk the talk and walk the walk. That's the ultimate doorman. He's the guy that really should never have to raise a hand. He's the one who picks and chooses who walks in the door. If the club owner gives him the opportunity and the ability to do so, then you're going to have a great club to go to and enjoy yourself, and there's going to be very, very limited amount of trouble. If you put a meathead on the front door that knows nothing but to respond, as per what Dave said, a predator type mentality, you're going to have nothing but trouble.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. A doorman's totally different. I would probably class myself more as a doorman than the bouncer.
Mm.
There are guys that are good at it. You can just be good at it. Like I remember when that Roadhouse movie came out, and everyone like,
That's a good example.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I get people come up to me and go, I always love that saying, I thought you'd be taller. I thought you'd be bigger. I used to get
Right.
that all the time. I've
Right.
all heard about you, Deane, but I thought you'd be bigger. I thought you'd be. I go away, idiot. But I think the doorman is a guy who can be presentable. You're presentable to the public. You can speak to anyone in any walk of life, and you can diffuse a situation or recognize the situation before it occurs.
Right.
Myself working as a doorman, I would look down a line and be able to pick and choose who was definitely going to be the one causing us trouble. As I said before, the guy that walks in laughing and so on, and sometimes you might do little things, say little things to them as they come up to the door to see what their attitude is. I'll get a group of guys come in, they're all smiling, they seem quite happy. Be one guy in the background with his head down. And I'd go, "G'day, guys, and how are you, mate? How's your night going? There you go, you don't look happy, mate. Everything all right?"
Mm.
You question him right from the beginning and see what the response is and how he's going to respond to you. I mean, that's really the skill of the doorman. That's really what it should. You're not there to be a thug, but then again, there are thugs out there. It's like any job. There are bad policemen, bad doctors, bad shop owners. We got a takeaway burger yesterday, and the service we got was disgusting. And so was the burger. But so the chef and the server were terrible. But it's like anything. But you really do need to be. To me, purposely, the doorman is the man if he can do those things. Very few and far between.
So I want to throw a metaphor out there to our audience, which ties into, and a great question, Michael, by the way. When I go back to here, the bouncer has D3 skill. Oh shit, a fight. The guy's hitting someone with a pool cue. He goes in. The doorman has D1, D2 skill. He's like the guy that goes, okay, that guy's going to be a problem. I'm going to go over there and diffuse him right now. Or, and it's an interesting thing to think about, but where I was going to go with this for everyone out there, because those of you that are martial artists can relate to this doorman bouncer metaphor. It's great. And this goes back to your martial purpose. If your martial purpose was personal safety, self-defense, then you need to develop both skills. You need to be the doorman to be situationally aware, verbally diffuse, but then you might have to be the bouncer, be your own bodyguard if you got to protect it. And protect yourself, your family, be a courageous bystander. So that's an interesting talk. Great question. Hey, one of my coaches, Brent, is on here, and he's up also in the Gold Coast area. And Brent loved this, and he wants to know if he has permission to use your martial purpose talk too. He trains a lot of kids.
Yeah, of course. Go for your life. Yeah. Look, I think martial purpose is the key to everything, because I see so many people that walk in the door when they go to the training gyms, and they start off. I go, "What did you start off doing?" And they go, "Oh, well, I came here for self-defense." And then you look at him and you think, well, mate, you've been training 3 years, and I don't think you could fight your way out of a wet paper bag.
Right.
And to me, it looks like you're doing martial arts choreography rather than actually fighting skills. So I think you really do need to maintain that martial purpose. What frightens you the most? You find with bullying, especially, um, because I came from that domestic violence situation as a kid, I found that when people bullied me, I'd freak out, completely freak out, because I felt like I was at home again. Someone was shouting at me, screaming at me, wanting to do this to me, wanting to hurt me. And I'm like, whoa. And sometimes I completely freeze. And it took me a while to overcome that, to find out, why am I responding this way? Why am I acting this way? It's some people grow up angry from it, and other people grow up terrified from it.
Mm.
And you can have that mixture. It really is. So yeah, bullying is a bloody terrible thing. I hate it. I hate seeing it. Now I'll be telling you, that's why I became Batman. I think for the main reason is I wanted to go around and beat people up that bullied people. I am one of those idiots that if I'm standing there and I see someone picking on someone, maybe not so much now, I'm getting old,
Right.
but I used to always step in. I'd always step in and go, mate, why don't you just go away and leave them alone? No, I couldn't help myself. I felt like it was part of my duty to diffuse the situation.
Good on you. And there's a lot of people who grew up with a background like you, and they continue the path,
Yeah,
100%.
100%.
And you've turned that around, man. I know that you're a great father and husband, and you've been a good friend to me. And just we didn't talk about this, but in one of the seminars I did in Sydney, Australia, there were like 50 people there. I got jumped by a guy during a demo, and there were 48 people jumped back, standing around looking to see what was going to happen. And this guy, he was there with 2 or 3 friends, and they got up and started to move towards me. I had gotten on top of the guy that jumped me, and I had just met Deane. He could have gone, well, here's this. I was Canadian at the time. Let's let this Canadian fucker who came to Australia, let him get rolled.
Think that for a second.
Right. He said, I can take over the world if Lawler goes down. But
he's dead on next. Yeah.
Right. But Deane got up there, and do you remember what you said to the guy that started to move in, like he might kick me in the face or something?
Yeah, I can't.
It was something, you called him a classic Australian word. I think you said, you don't even think about it, cunt. Right?
Yeah. I was pretty wild. It's quite funny because look at your memories change over the years. I'm not going to reiterate the story, but right. I just remember years later, whenever it was spoken about on forums, it was like, yeah, remember that mad Italian guy that came out and attacked us? And I was like, who the hell is that? No, hang on, they're talking about me? No, man, right. I'm an Irishman. Get the hell out of here.
You look Italian.
The mad Italian guy, the mad Italian guy. Like, hey, some Italian-looking guy just came out and attacked us, and then he tried to attack us in the car park, and which I did, unfortunately. But But
you had my back there, man. And it was after that we were friends for life, because literally 49 people were like, ooh, because there were 3 or 4 guys from a
without going too much into the story. One thing I always remember is that the amount of people that actually stood back and didn't do anything. Mm-hmm. I stepped in, and then of course then there were a few followed after that.
Right.
There were a couple that jumped in and going, hey, what's going on? What's going on? And I'm thankful for those guys too, because there were a couple that jumped in and actually diffused it. Mm-hmm. Situation. Otherwise, it would have got nasty, I think, because I was getting to the point now where, I was pretty much going, well, it's going to be on. I'm going to get stuck into it. I still remember looking down at you going, mate, you're right. You've got that. Good. I'll handle this bloke. It was like, it was ready to go. And then other people with maybe a bit more sense at the time, I was still in the D3 mentality. and lucky D1 and D2 showed up.
You were like, fuck this D2 guy. Yeah.
But lucky those guys jumped in, and I give thanks to them because they diffused the situation.
Yeah, but that wouldn't have happened. This is why I always say, courage is contagious.
Yeah.
And had you not done anything, all it would have took is because I had reversed the attack. I was on top of the guys about to fucking hit him, and then I just thought, shit, my son Nicky, who's 9 months old, was out with a babysitter that we
Yep.
had hired.
Yep.
I didn't know where he was, and I'm like, if I put this guy in the hospital, my passport's here. I was like, that all went through my head in a nanosecond. But one of those guys could have kicked me in the face.
Oh yeah,
fucking.
I think
had it not been, you're being polite, man. Had it not been for you, because they were getting up to move in.
Yeah, I think the mentality to it is that you work when you know what you're doing in those situations and it's clear to you. There's clarity there. You start to realize, okay, you're handling that. Well, now I can handle this part of it, and I think that takes control of the situation. But look, any encounters frightening. It's ridiculous. You know, human beings, we're just mad monkeys. We can't help ourselves. As my dad always said, you know, just because we can put on a pair of pants, we all think we're a bit special. But, but that's how we are, and that's how we act. And I think another thing before we cut it off, I think we've also got to look at the point now in self-defense. Now we're getting an older generation of people like ourselves. And our training needs to change, and our mentality needs to change a little bit as well. You know, doing the long rounds on the bags, well, you know, we're not doing them anymore. You know, doing all the mad training anymore, we can't really do that too often. So you shorten your training, you make your training a little bit more, maybe a little bit intense for shorter periods of time. You know, you change the way you're getting yourself physically ready for situations. You know, I spend a lot more time now learning how to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I said before, learning how to extend my body, you know, working more on the forearms. You know, when I'm doing ab work or any type of strength work now, I spend more time working my back, strengthening my back, maintaining some form of maintaining hip flexibility, shoulder flexibility more so than ever. And I think, you know, your training changes.
Guys, listen to that. Don't take that with a grain of salt. Take that like as gospel. We are all aging athletes, and every time I fuck myself up, it's because the 20-year-old Tony goes, you lift that weight or hit that bag or throw that kick, and the 62-year-old Tony goes, I wouldn't do that if I were you. But
well, this is what I do. I don't compare myself anymore to what I was then. If I've got a 20-year-old in class and he's doing fantastic moves, and my ego kicks in and I want to try to do what he's doing, I stop now because I say to myself, I don't compare myself to a 20-year-old. I compare myself to I'm 61. I compare myself to another 61-year-old. And compared to another 61-year-old, I move pretty bloody good.
Right.
And I'm happy with that. So when I'm 62, I compare myself to a 62-year-old.
Right on.
But comparing yourself to a 30-year-old when you're 61, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
You want to be the fittest, strongest 61-year-old in the room. You may be the only one. But, I mean, that's how you want to be. Right. I mean, don't ever do that comparison because you'll be sorely disappointed. It'll destroy your ego and it'll destroy your confidence.
As well as maybe parts of your body. Hey, one last thing here. You know, I've been going to Australia for 3 decades now. I will tell you this, wherever I was teaching, if Deane wasn't busy and committed, he would literally fly to where I was and show up, hang out. We'd go have a bite to eat, go have a couple cappuccinos, but he would show up at the seminars. Here's one where, also to his credit, the Richard Norton showed up, and this was this was in Melbourne, I believe. Yeah, and we were all someone had brought the 3 covers of Impact magazine that we were on, and we took a picture together, and it was kind of cool. But I just wanted to let you guys know that you know, that's a real friend, but also like he's truly a martial artist in the sense of studying the arts, and he's more polite than I am. Even though I'm older than him, you'd think I'd be wiser, but I'm not. In seeing some of that value, and I'm being facetious there. I'll talk about that another time, but we got to wrap up here. Yeah. Guys, the best way to reach you is Facebook, right? That's the only social media.
Facebook's the best way to reach me. I will be changing that very soon. You know, we're looking at putting this a YouTube channel together and a whole lot of different things. Right. But I'm a bit of a perfectionist. You know, I want to make sure it looks 1,000,000% before I even
Right.
go ahead with it. I want it to look part. And I'll actually probably on the channel, so I'll probably interview a few people and do a few things. But I want to go. I don't want to become like another Joe Rogan or any of that type of shit. You know, I
Right.
want to. Not saying this shit, but I'm saying I want to go in that area. You know, but I really want to start looking at the aging population. I want to look at that fear base. I want to look at so many different ways of about training rather than necessarily and talking to people like yourself and how you are now at your age. Where have you noticed the changes? I mean, I think that's really interesting stuff. I think people want to learn that. You know where
That's
to go.
good. That's a good theme, man. Like
Yeah.
you can call it the aging athletes or
Yeah,
or a
the old
grumpy old martial
grumpy
art.
old bastards. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Was that
Okay.
a question we had there? Missed a question.
Yeah, no, it was just a comment from that guy, Michael. I'll put it up here. I just let it for like people watching the show to read that, but just Michael, thank you so much. That was a great question
Thanks, Michael.
before, and so glad you're
Yeah,
enjoying these.
definitely. And
Um,
that shows that he's got experience in the industry because very few people in the industry
would ask that question.
will ask that question.
Yeah,
You know, there
that's
is a major difference between it.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you one thing, you get a good doorman, you're laughing. And they're very few and far between. There used to be a lot more of them around. Now there isn't. It's
Right.
really amazing how the attitude of young people has changed so much now.
Right.
One quick thing before you go. I actually had a guy that resigned from me because he got pushed over by a guy that was half his size. And this guy's a fit young guy. And one of his main reasons was that he goes, I joined up this job for the glory. And I remember going, the what? The glory? What? Being sworn at, spat on, and punched? What glory are you talking about?
Right.
So it's amazing how the attitude has changed a bit to what the job originally was all about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
Like that, yeah.
Brother Deane, thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much. No, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, of course, we'll do it again when you get your other, when the training center goes more prime time.
Yeah.
Let's expose that a little bit. I'm going to sign off now, guys. Please share this. Share it with your family, share it with your friends, tag people you know. Follow us on YouTube because that's really where we want to grow the community as these other platforms get weirder and weirder. Deane, thank you so much, buddy. Stick around for a minute. I want to talk to you a little bit more after the show. Stand by.
Okay, no worries.